the long game has always been hailed as a hallmark of strategic wisdom. But in the world that rewards speed and punishes delays, is the long game becoming irrelevant? So that's the question that we have right now. This discussion, we will try to examine the focus on long term goals. Does it blind companies to immediate opportunities, or whether it remains the ultimate path to sustainable success? So basically, long term game versus losing out on the opportunities in the short term. So the topic, once again, is playing the long game a short-sighted plan? Over to you for your insights with your experience. So we could start from any side. Anybody who would like to, kind of. So would you like to go? Yeah, go ahead.
I think I'm not sure if it's long term versus short term. Frankly, I don't really see it like that. And again, it's a little bit sector dependent. There are some sectors where the rate of change is very high, and there are some sectors where the rate of change is actually much slower. Think of my sector as an example. I'll give two examples. So, the chemical industry, it takes me roughly 24 months to put up a plant, minimum, not less than that. Is that long term or is that short term is now a question mark. Whereas you get into the fintech game, and 24 months is probably long for them, right? Or you get into an e-com game, 24 months is probably long for them. So that's the first point. It depends on the sector. Second, imagine you're, sailing in the ocean. There are two things that happen now. One, there are currents that take you in a particular direction. And second, there are waves, which move your ship left or right, or, impact it on an immediate basis. You got to watch both. You can't do either or. You can't say, I'll only play the currents and ignore the waves, or I'll only play the waves and ignore the currents. So I see the long term as the currents in the ocean. You got to know them. You got to ride them. You got to have a long-term plan. You can't just plan by the year or even 2 years. At the same time, you got to take care of what's happening to you on the immediate basis, this month, this quarter, this year, and you have to navigate that as well. But if you try to only play the short-term game without having a long-term vision, I think that's going to be very difficult. When we use the word strategy, you build your strategy based on what's happening in the marketplace, what are the trends, you try to predict what's going to happen in the future with the knowledge that you have. And at the same time, you got to build a certain level of flexibility and adaptability in that strategy. Nobody builds a strategy and says, I'm just going to do this irrespective of what happens. No. As you see changes happening in the environment, or changes happening internally, or changes happening with competitors, you adapt, you modify. So as long as you have a long-term strategy in place and a plan in place, which has certain flexibility and adaptability built in, and you're at the same time keeping track of what's happening in the short term, I think it's an and. I don't see it as or.
Wonderful, sir. Very nicely started. Would anybody like to go ahead? Yes.
I'll take up from where Vishal left off, and I come from the digital and technology space, which one would argue is significantly more, at least perceived as significantly more short-term. Things are getting invented, things are getting discovered at amazing rates, make you irrelevant. The words that marketing partners use is you're irrelevant, you will be out. So,
Disruptive.
yeah, and talking significantly around adaptability and short term. And I can say absolutely, the same thing that Vishal said, which is that you're not going to be around in the long term if all you're doing is short term pivoting. I worked with G for the better part of 14 years, and I remember this conversation coming up with Jack Welch, and he said, you can't do long term if you can't do short term. I think that's what he famously said when asked about the dichotomy there. And we were talking about certain industries which were on the verge of disruption, a huge financial services business that was disrupted at many levels. So I think somewhat prophetic there. But absolutely to say you got to have long term, even flexibility is a strategy. Especially when you come to tech, the idea that you build flexible tech is a strategic choice.
Good point. Yeah.
And if you don't look at that, you can the cost of becoming flexible go up every year. So further, accelerating or cycling you towards irrelevance if you don't catch that.
Yeah, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
So I think the topic is such that it's difficult to stay in the fence in this one, because at the end of it, you are living some of these experiences yourself as a leader, right? So I come from a consulting services firm. So in a way, I have two hats. One is the strategy of my company and what we advise our clients also. So from both those perspectives, what I see is that gradually we see midterm becoming more talked about than a short term or a long term. Most companies have today got enough capability to work out the short term, right, on their own. Long term is super critical because you need a North Star, right? So you need to know that, this is where I need to get, that ambition, right? And that ambition drives a lot of changes through the organization. But what we see more companies saying is what's the midterm? Now, that definition keeps changing. What was midterm 20 years back is different, right? So now say 5 years, 7 years is what people are talking about. Enough time, to make investments, whether it's capital or people, whatever kind of investments, and to see changes on the ground. We see that happening a lot. For my own company, which I represent, which is consulting services, things are changing very, very rapidly, right? We hear about Gen AI making consultants irrelevant, right? In a way saying that, okay, you can ask whatever you want. Why do you need a consultant, right? So those questions are being posed to us. So if we don't adapt, and this is not necessarily something we could have predicted 10 years back, that agility is important today, right? And today and for the next 2 years, 3 years, how do we bring things towards our fore, make ourselves relevant in the next 2-3 years is obviously the hot topic. Keep sight of the midterm and then have a North Star at the long term, right? I think that's how I think most companies are evolving. And we see this from the clients that we advise also.
Yeah.
I come from the consumer durable industry. So recently in my last assignment, same discussions were going on. I come from a German background company. So I completely agree with Vishal and all the gentlemen here that ultimate goal is long-term strategy. I always tells my team that never lose the focus of the long-term strategy. And the company and the leaders, they have to be flexible enough to adopt and adapt a short-term changes in the market, because they will always come. So let us talk about consumer durable industry, for example. As you rightly said, Apple and let's say Samsung, LG, what they've done. They came to India in 1993 and they had the long-term vision in their mind that they will be number one, number two players. So without thinking of the profitability at that time, they set up the plants. They went for the local products like what Indians were using. And there are companies who are not looking at long-term. Let us say few Chinese companies, they came, they created some waves in the market and they vanished in 7 years, right? So it is very, very important to have that long-term vision in your mind. And that is one goal, as you said, North Star. You have to chase that. And then on your way, you have to be flexible enough to keep making, small changes in the market. I think both the things are important, but the ultimate goal remains the long-term vision.